A punto de explotar tu camisa. It's about to explode.
All right, Danny, we should be good. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome back to the Grayson Network, the round table with Danny Ellison. Tonight's topic, the Federal Reserve, the IRS. What are they doing with your money? And are they really in control? I'm joined tonight by my panelist, Mr. Derek Grayson, candidate for the United States Senate here in the state of Georgia, Miss Josie Cruz from the 4th District of Georgia, running for the United States Congress, and we'll be joined by several of our other panelists tonight. Throughout the next hour and a half, I ask you to join me on the journey as we talk about the American dollar, what it is, what it isn't, and those that are actually trying to control it. First, I would like to start with Mr. Derek Grayson, affectionately my brother in politics. Derek, I want to come to you and I want to ask your breakdown for the next 5 minutes. You got 5 minutes to break down the Federal Reserve on our intro this evening.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Ellison, and welcome to everyone. I'll try and stay within that 5 minutes. But first, let me, and Hank Sullivan, my dear friend, will correct me if I'm wrong on the time frame, but I understood the basics of the Federal Reserve from what we were taught in school. I knew that it wasn't a federal entity, a private bank and whatnot, but that was cursory knowledge. It wasn't until I met my friend and now whom I call my brother in Christ, Hank Sullivan, down at a protest at the Federal Reserve down on Peachtree Street. And let me tell you, when I went down that rabbit hole with Hank, I understood at that point, you know, we talk about all of these other things, but Hank and I share a little common bit of information that, you know, we don't really focus on with people. We try to tell them about the Federal Reserve, but we understand that if we fix everything else, but don't do anything about the Federal Reserve, nothing else matters at the end of the day under our current monetary system. A second piece of knowledge we understand that most others don't, even those that are running for office, that seem to think that we can balance the budget. Well, there is no balancing the budget under our current monetary system because of ever increasing spending and ever increasing borrowing, which is one of the fundamentals that people don't understand. And one of the other gentlemen running for U.S. Senate in another debate that I was in tried to compare the Federal Reserve with what Lincoln did with the greenbacks. And, you know, I sat there and I shook my head. And when we came back, and I called the moderator and apologized after the fact, but I said, you see, you got two problems. One, you don't even have a basic understanding of the fundamental differences between what Lincoln did and what we are doing today as a result of 1913. And number two, the Constitution was written on a 5th grade level, and we expect people to go to DC and obey the Constitution. But you can't even obey the moderator when he holds up the sign for 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and then stop. You just keep on going. So you are determined to continue to persist in this ignorance, moving forward, thinking that the federal government has resources. The federal government has no money of its own, okay? Everything they get, they borrow from a private entity. And every time they borrow, they transfer the wealth of America, that's you and I, to a private entity. They get richer, we get the debt. It's just like a credit card. If a credit card has a $10,000 limit on it, an individual may think when they open it and see the credit limit, oh, I've got $10,000. No, you don't. What you've got in your hand is debt. And that is the same thing with the Federal Reserve notes. It's not money, it is debt. But I've kind of, went a little maybe too far down the rabbit hole. I'll leave the deeper explaining to Hank, because I think he can cut it down and pare it down to where it's more palatable for our listeners. But the bottom line, Mr. Ellison, we can fix all of the other issues in this country. If we do not address the issue with the Federal Reserve, nothing else will matter, because one day we will wake up and Americans won't own a damn thing in this country. I yield.
So, Mr. Grayson, what I hear you saying is, in the words of Scott, and I'm sure this is a quote from somebody out there, is that she got the gold mine and I got the shaft. Mr. Sullivan, we're coming to you. Hank, I want to welcome you to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Hank Sullivan is one of our political writers. He's an author, and I'd like to call him a political correspondent. He's a very good insight to have on the table. Hank, tonight we're talking about the Federal Reserve. We're talking about the IRS, the placement and placard that they hold in the American economy, our dollars, how they move, how they tax us, and how they gamble with everything that we earn. So, Hank, I want to turn it over to you for the next 10 minutes. Your words, your thoughts, your topic.
Well, I appreciate it, Danny. I'll come in on the heels of what Derek was saying. The Federal Reserve is something that when I started to really understand what was going on with the Federal Reserve, this was after the 2008, 2009 economic disaster that we had. And I spent, I can't even begin to tell you how much time I've spent to try to understand what all that was about. Because I didn't understand at the time why it was we were so concerned about the banks. Because I didn't understand that the banks were center of that economic disaster that we were living through, because the banks died. The banks were gone. The Wall Street banks had no way to recover on their own, because the system was over. It was kaput. It had run its course and it had died. So they spent the next, the entire Obama administration trying to bolster the banking system in order to create a functionality, knowing that they weren't really dealing with the problem. Because the problem is that the banks issue our money supply, dollars, Federal Reserve notes, but they only issue them when they take back a promise to pay that is based on interest. And so our entire money supply, I came to understand and came to learn, is issued at interest payable back to private banks. And so try to get it really simple here. If there's only $1 in existence and the bank just loaned that dollar into existence, into circulation with 1% interest, well, anyone who holds that dollar, who took the loan and signed their name on the loan documents, is going to have to pay that dollar back with interest. But there is not any money in circulation to pay the interest. And so the only way, and I take that and expand that to the entire American money supply. And then beyond that, it's infected the entire world, because every country, practically every modern country is under the same system. There's never enough money to pay back the loans that we use as legal tender with interest. So the only way to pay it back is to borrow more and more money. That is the reason for the national debt. That is the reason for the personal debt of the American people. That's the reason why we have so much credit card debt, is because there's not enough money to pay back the loans that created the money supply in the first place. So for example, right now, there, at least last time I looked, there was like $70 trillion of both national debt and personal debt. And all of those dollars had been entered into our money supply at one time. There was $70 trillion entered into the money supply, and it's floating around, albeit it's been entered into circulation over time. But now, well, at least up about 6 months ago, there were only $14 trillion floating around. Well, what happened to the rest? Because you've got to have 70 trillion to pay back the loans, but you've only got 14 trillion in circulation. Well, over 100 years of operating this system, the difference between what is owed and what is remaining that could pay it back is simply the interest owed back that's been paid to the private banks of Wall Street over time. That's the problem. The problem is not that the government spends too much. The problem is that what it spends, it doesn't own. In other words, the government does not have equity in the monetary system. The banks don't even have equity in the monetary system because the whole thing is based upon borrowing it. Even the banks borrow it. Where do the banks borrow the dollars that they put into circulation? From the air. When the banks borrow the money that they put into circulation, it comes out of the air. And so when it gets paid back, the banks have to take those same dollars and put them back into the air from whence they came. So that's why there's never enough money in circulation to pay it back, and the debt gets larger and larger and larger, and the system has no way to remedy this problem. Then you cannot pay off debt by borrowing more debt. The only way to pay off this system is with another system. You've got to have another system that's based upon equity to pay off this system that's based upon debt, because the only way to pay off debt is with equity. You've got to earn equity. You've got to borrow debt. So what I believe, I have good reason to believe, is that this next term, President Trump knows everything I just said. He knows it better than I do. Is going to create a new system that is not based upon borrowing. It's based upon establishment of equity. So in other words, rather than government borrowing to pay its bills, the government would simply be the printer of the currency. The government would create the money itself. So if the government creates it, then the government owns it. But if the government borrows it, then someone else owns it. And if someone else borrowed it, then somebody else owns it. So it's going to be an entire inversion of the present system in order to create what some call sound money. You know, what sound money is, something people have different ideas of what that really means, but I'll tell you what it means to me. And that is that sound money is based upon equity. It's based upon someone owning something and loaning it out. If you own it, you can loan it out and it's owed back to you with interest. But if you don't own it, then you're the one having to pay the interest. One of the things that really always just bugs me is that people can't realize that the United States government is the most powerful entity in the world. It has the power, it could blow the planet up 100 times if it wanted to. So this most powerful government in the entire world has to borrow to pay its bills? Really? No, they just set it up that way. Why did they set it up that way? Because the government imparted its own sovereignty to a private banking system. The private banking system bought enough influence inside the government to give the government the reason to then give it back, give our national sovereignty, our ability as a nation to create our own purposes and install our own policies to address those purposes to a private banking system. Now it's the private banking system that has the means to control the government because we gave it to them. It's just like anything. If you give it away, it's no longer yours again. But we can take it back anytime we want to because it was given away by law. We can take it back by law, or we can take it back by simply changing policy. And this may be what President Trump does to begin with. President Trump could decide, all he has to do is just tell the US Treasury, don't borrow. By the way, let's issue some more money, but don't borrow it. Let's print that in-house and pay off what we just borrowed with that. That's all he's got to do. All he has to do is pay off what has already been borrowed by printing the money in-house rather than having the banking system print the money. So when you pay off a Federal Reserve note, that money, that dollar, goes back into the air from whence it came, and it gets replaced by an equity dollar. That dollar doesn't have to be borrowed. There's no interest attached to it. The government just printed it. It's like magic practically. The system works. And what Derek was talking about with Lincoln is, if somebody tries to say that Lincoln was pushing the Federal Reserve, that's crazy. Lincoln printed, the way that he financed the Civil War, he did what I just said. The government itself just printed the dollars out of the air, and everyone said, and they declared it legal tender, and everyone said, okay, that's fine. And they started paying the bills of the government, which went into circulation, and that's how they financed the entire war. The South, they're the ones that borrowed from the Rothschild Bank, from the Bank of England, in order to try to finance their dealings. And then they were selling cotton back and forth. So they had a situation with the Bank of England so that they could then trade on the international economy. But Lincoln didn't do that. So the bottom line is that the national debt can be paid off, but it cannot be paid off as long as there's a Federal Reserve. It can be paid off by the US Treasury by simply taking back in the means of the creation of currency and doing it in-house versus borrowing it from a private bank.
So Hank, what a breakdown. What a breakdown. But you brought up several points that make me want to take this to the next level, right? So we're talking about the Rothschilds at this point. We're talking about Europe at this point, which leads us into the mid-19th century, where we start discussing debtors' prisons, right? So when we talk about the debtors' prisons and what they were, it was an incarceration attempt for those that owed outstanding debts to the government. The problem was when in the mid-19th century, when we were trying to pay off those debts, that only half of your work equity, use the word equity, was going towards the debt. The other half was paying for the sustainment of your incarceration. That being said, are we still living in a day of 50-50, where what we're trying to do to get out of debt only pays towards the debt margin partially, and the rest of it is simply still feeding the system?
Well, I didn't know where you're going with that initially, but yes, I understand what you're saying now, because what we do when we pay our taxes, we're in debtor's prison right here. We're in prison because they can enforce us to have to work for free. We're slaves. We're working for free to pay back the source of the money. The money comes from a private banking system. So the dollars that we pay back in the form of federal income tax largely goes to you're not going to pay it off, to pay the debt service on the national debt. So yes, we are in a very real sense slaves to the system. They own us because we have to pay it. If we don't pay it, then they can incarcerate us, just like you said. Or they can take what we have, or they can take our means of production for our families and they can claim it for themselves in order to pay back the source of the money, which is an illegitimate debt. It's an illegitimate debt because the banking system was not at risk when it generated the dollars. The banking system created the dollars out of the air and they loaned them into circulation. But if we don't pay it back, they're out nothing because they can print more dollars out of the air. So I understand what you're saying now, and I agree with you that we are debt slaves as long as this system operates. The good news is, like I said, I've been telling people this ever since I figured it out 8 or 9 years ago. And that is that the system died in 2008, 2009. It was dead. It's dead now, but it's on life support. And if you look at the money supply, if you look at the national debt clock and look at the money supply is increasing like you wouldn't believe. It was at 12. It was at 14, and it was at 14 not too long ago. It's over $18 trillion right now. The reason, now you got to understand this. You understand what Trump's doing here, because people say, oh, Trump's just running national debt up. Well, he's trying to keep the system alive. All this PPP money, all the money they're throwing out even to the hospitals. I mean, I uncovered today that every COVID patient accepted into the hospital, that means the hospital gets $50,000. Well, that money's going somewhere. That money keeps the system going. There's a reason for all this stuff. There's a reason why they're doing it, because they're trying to keep the system going to get through this election, at which time Trump can then replace the system, pay off that system with an equity system. That's what this entire thing is all about. Why they're having to keep creating so much money, because they've got to bridge the gap in order to get to the other side.
Hey, you brought up a couple things that and I don't want to cut out our other panelists. I want to bring them in, and Josie, be ready, because I'm coming to you next, because I think this cross lines into Venezuela very well. But Hank, you pointed out a couple things. First, you said that each coronavirus COVID-19 confirmed patient is a payout from the federal government to the hospital that states that they have this case, or they present a test result that they have this case, is $50,000. Now, common knowledge to people like me on the street, without being able to dig deep into this, is that it's an $8,000 payout. $8,000 is a long way from $50,000. So being that $50,000, the common tongue doesn't know that. Media's not talking about that. Mainstream media is not talking about that. So what I would like, Hank, is if you could, throughout this show, if you would just add the link in the comments to a reference that supports the $50,000, that would be amazing and phenomenal for our viewers. At the same time, there was another point that you had pointed out where you talked about our economy being held hostage, and the economy itself stopped to exist. It ceased to exist in 2008, 2009, but it's on life support. Well, it's very interesting to me that is the same time that President Obama came into his administration, again, reelected in 2012. And the lifeline was either backed by the GOP-based Senate and or Congress that floated and floated and floated. And now we have President Trump. And all of a sudden, the dollar has value. Economics makes sense. Debtors' prisons are real. What is happening on projections is in the 2020 election, economically, our nation might be better off if we elect Trump again in 2020. What say you, Hank?
Well, let me support what I just said. All right, I'm looking at a document here that's published by the Georgia Hospital Association. It's entitled Federal Funding Opportunities for Hospitals. And on page 3, it says, HHS will be making a second round of COVID-19 high-impact area payments totaling to $10 billion. Timing: eligible hospitals will begin receiving funds the week of July 20th, which is this week, 2020. Eligibility: hospitals with over 161 COVID-19 admissions between January 1st and January 10th, or one admission per day, or or that experienced a disproportionate intensity of COVID admissions, hospitals will be paid $50,000 per eligible admission. And then there's a link that takes you back to that. Now, I haven't seen it, but somebody pointed out to me earlier today that the earlier figure was $77,000. So they're paying $50,000 per admission per day to each one of the hospitals that is under this program from the HHS. Now, what was the rest of your question?
Well, I mean, it was, my statement was more implied, Hank, you know, in the side of watching all of this happen in the timelines. And it wasn't so much a question, but I think the clarity in the quote, folks, listen, if you're watching this tonight, I want you to back up for the last 52 seconds. I want you to go back to what Hank just pointed out. You need to understand that the federal government is openly admitting for every hospital that has said that they have a patient that is COVID related, they are going to get a check for $50,000. Do you understand? The medical community has already said that 96% of all people that are confirmed to be tested with COVID-19 will go home and over a 10-day period, take some vitamin C and a little bit of, penicillin and, some other things that might help your immune system, that you'll get over it in 10 days. But because they diagnosed you, because they saw you, they visited with you, they spoke to you, they get $50,000. I don't care what HMO.
I think they have to admit them to the hospital.
Well, they have to be admitted.
I think they have to admit them to the hospital.
Okay, well, an admission is nothing more than a few hours. You can be released later. So anything in an ER beyond 4 hours is considered being admitted. If you move from an ER bed to any other stabilizing room, that's considered being admitted. There is no timeline to being admitted. The point is there's no HMO or PPO or PCO in standard medical provision or insurance that is paying a hospital $50,000 for 24 hours of a diagnosis that releases you in zinc, penicillin, vitamin C, vitamin D, drink water, stay away from people, check your temperature, and eat a little bit healthier than what you've been doing. The point is that there's piracy happening right now here in our country. Debtors' prisons are real. We, the American taxpayers, are footing the bill for this. Josie, I'm coming to you because I'm going to lose my mind live tonight. Josie, this sounds to me like something that you witnessed in Venezuela, 1986 to 1989. The overthrow of the medical system through crisis that resulted in the breaking of the government instrumental system. The currency folded and Venezuela was left with nothing but the United States to bail them out. Josie, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to unleash your wrath, and I pray that you give the American people tonight the justice of understanding that this is not new.
This is not new. They couldn't destroy the economy before COVID. So with this, $50,000 for each patient admitted in the hospital. I used to work in the hospital in the medical department, in the medical coding department. And just assign a code for each procedure, and each diagnosis is one price on top of another price. And then when you find out, we're talking about 30,000, 50,000, for something. This is fraud. Plain and simple. They're trying to destroy the economy one way or another. They did it in Venezuela. They want the private sector, in this case, hospitals, they're taking advantage of this. I want to say that they are enriching themselves too, but at the same time, they are not taking into consideration while they are doing this, they are destroying the economy of the United States. And then if we destroy our economy, and then we're going back to, it's like a cycle. In Venezuela today, the government is printing money. out of the air. Okay, the money worth nothing. Before it used to be backed by gold. I'm talking many years ago. Like it used to be here, that's my understanding, in America, gold support was the dollar was support on gold. What point in our history it became out of the air, like a hand was explaining? I would like to know that part, of course. I don't know everything, but what I'm seeing is forcing America to break their economies. They're forcing us to go
Catherine
into
Bernard.
a new world order.
Join the meeting.
Controlling completely the economy of the Americans. And nothing worked before. This one is working. Why? Because Americans, they are very scared about their health. America is one of the countries that a lot of people live the longest ages. Like you can find people living here with 95, even 100 years. In those countries, in the third world countries, people, a lot of them die when they are 55, 60s, because of heart attack or lack of medication or lack of doctor attention. A lot of things that we have here. What I'm saying is, we Americans are so used to take care of our body a certain age that we are 80 years old, 85, 90, and we are so afraid. And then these people are taking advantage of us being afraid of being sick, or let me talk in the Christian way. Being afraid of confront Jesus or God after life. It's like a lot of people are not ready to die. They are not, but I can say they're not sure about if they're going to be saved after they die. If they're going to be ready to confront, or the feeling of being afraid sidetrack them, and they stop looking at Jesus and the hope and the peace that he gave us, because the Bible said, do not be afraid, So it's a lot of mentality game. It's a lot of psychological game playing into the American community, the Americans, about health, being afraid of, death is part of our life. That's part of, we're gonna die one day. Of course, we wanna delay it as much as we can. But in Venezuela, they broke down the health system completely by making it free for everybody. But online, there is nothing in there. The doctor can diagnose you, but you don't have no medication. The doctor can prescribe you a treatment, but there is nothing that you can do your treatment because lack of medication, lack of tools, lack of equipment, lack, and I can keep on counting. But it's this communist and this new world order, or like Hank Johnson taught me 2 weeks ago, those people in the top who are using the communist way of, remember Hank? Forcing us to live as a slave. And when we remember the slavery time, the slave didn't have no right to eat. They didn't have not even right to live. The owner of the slave could even decide when the slave would live and when that slave would die. Thank you.
So, Josie, you broke down something that was a phenomenal delivery. Thank you for that, because it actually brings a perception in, right? So where the viewers can actually see that what we're experiencing here in the United States, we have been comforted for so many years and blanketed and protected by administrations that made sure that we were living in the land of freedom. But today, it seems like the socialist agenda, the left agenda, the communist agenda is advancing on us based on jealousy, this frustration that we can survive, that we've become a world power in domination because we're united. So right now in our own country, we're watching this split in the divide. But I want to go back to a medical point that you brought up. You had said that in Venezuela, they had offered free healthcare. And when they had done that, they had chased out, and this is just my insertion, that they had chased out the best doctors that were there to not only do their job, but they had to make a living. Medical school is not cheap. And so when medical care became free, the doctors had to flee. And believe it or not, if I'm not mistaken, most of those Venezuelan doctors wound up working for the American Red Cross, the International Association of Medical Affiliates. All of these people going into crisis networks in other countries, they abandoned their own country because they would have been sent into a debtor's prison as a medical provider with no provisions. Is this the case?
A lot of doctors, they are working, even here in the United States, they are certified as a medical assistant. So a lot of doctors here are hiring those doctors as a medical assistant with a broad knowledge of being a doctor. But I'm talking about certification problems, right? So they are working on that, and that not only in the United States, but in every other country. Venezuela, the salary for a doctor in Venezuela today is $6 a month. $6 a month. Doctors, I found out that a lot of doctors, a few, not too many, I shouldn't say a lot of doctors, but a few doctors are committing suicide. Because when they see their patients dying and they cannot do anything to help them, because most of the doctors are in our country, they do it because of their calling. It's a call for them to be a doctor. Some of them commit suicidal and they cannot understand what's going on. They still don't understand there is the system that they gave them. For example, the medical school in Venezuela is free. It's not paid. University in Venezuela is free. But because it's free, what they teach them is socialism. Medical socialism, everything is about how to make the socialism system work. So they may know how the body, the component of the body, how the body works, and they may prescribe you with the medication and all that, but they don't understand the economic part of the business of the medicine. Because in order for a doctor to support his family, he needs to make a living. But also, in order for the doctor to fulfill his function as a doctor, is seeing his patients getting better, improving their health, improving their life. And then when they see these people dying with cancer, dying with a simple thing as a fever, they don't even have a Tylenol, an aspirin for fever. It's very frustrated for them because they cannot help. And this is exactly what's going to happen in America is we get into the Medicare or healthcare for everybody free. This is what's going to happen at the end. Because when there is no private sector investing in the medical field, like doing like an investigation, research, doing all this, when these scientific or researchers discover new medication, new treatment, then there is no answer to help out their population.
Right. So Josie, you brought up a great point, and that is when you said that when there is no private sector. And I want to stop right there. And I want to bring this conversation back to the Federal Reserve and the IRS. Derek, I'm coming to you, and prepare yourself, because I'm going to give you about 12 minutes just to unleash, Derek, where I want you to really highlight. I promised you that I was going to give you a fight. I promised you I was going to allow this topic. And I want to do this, Derek, because it is very important for our viewers. I mean, let's think about it. We are 4 months away from the actual battle rhythm of your election, a Senate seat in the state of Georgia, which is so seriously heavy. This is no joke. We have you We have Loeffler and we have Collins. That is not a wide field at all. It is one and the same with both of them. It is catastrophically different for our constituents with you. I need to give you 12 minutes to go. But before I come to you to talk about the Federal Reserve, before I come to you to talk about abolishing the IRS and the understate, I want you to take this note from what Josie just said. When there is no private sector, it means there is no balance. It means that everything from then on is dictatorial. So marinate on that. Catherine, I'm coming to you right now. I just want to catch you up. Catherine, I've been a little bit fired up tonight. This conversation gets me in my feelings. And the truth be told, I'm a firecracker. Derek wanted to fight, and I've been doing research for the last week to give it to him, and now it's officially here. I know you may have your ideology, your thought process, what you have bailed out for your night, and you're going to get a total of 12 minutes tonight instead of 10. But just to give you a backdrop, what we're talking about is the Federal Reserve, the corruption and how our economy works in the United States, the politics involved in it, and the corporatism that oversees it, along with the IRS, its robbery versus its incompetence. And we're talking about how it relates to our South American countries and other socialist and communist nations around the world. So, Catherine, the next 12 minutes is yours. Opine how you like, guide the conversation, and I'll be back with you as soon as you're ready to wrap it up.
Well, thank you so much, Danny. It's great to be on with everybody tonight. And as always, I appreciate hearing Josie's perspective, because there's just something about talking about socialism and communism with people who have actually experienced it and lived through it that is just such an important counterweight to the opinions of, you know, everyone we're hearing on social media and in big urban centers in the United States. And, you know, socialism to them just means let's everybody share, let's everybody be nice to each other and make sure that they can see a doctor. And so it's so important for people to see the actual empirical data of what happens when these kinds of economic systems are put into place. You know, these kinds of collective control and coercion redistribution situations that ultimately are not able to provide the services for everyone. You know, for a lot of people, it's very intuitive that, oh, people are poor, let's give them money. People need to go to the doctor, let's make it free for them to go to the doctor. But they don't think about, well, somebody's still got to pay for it. And now, not only do we have to figure out a way to pay for the actual medical care, we have to figure out a way to pay for all of the different layers of government that are going to come along and regulate how you get that medical care and how the doctor gets paid. So ultimately, it's not surprising that that governments and economic systems like this ultimately, you know, go into very heavy levels of debt. Not that the United States has any room to talk on scary debt levels, but again, it's just always refreshing to hear from Josie and the actual perspective of someone who knows these economic systems and their costs in detail, because we really do need a reality check, a lot of us. People are very comfortable in the United States. We see this constantly in discussions. People are very sheltered. They think, well, you know, the world is always going to be this rich. They don't realize what a historical anomaly we are experiencing right now in terms of what humanity has accomplished. And they don't understand how fragile that prosperity and human flourishing is, how quickly it can be taken away by government power, and even when that government power is well-intentioned. And so when I thought about the topic for this week of the Federal Reserve, you know, Derek and I have marched at plenty of In the Fed rallies together. That's always been an enjoyable opportunity to meet other people who are concerned about fractional reserve banking and the impact that it has on the global money supply and the value of the money that is in our own pockets. But, you know, the Federal Reserve, it's not an immediate concern to the folks in the crime and punishment arena, but it is making their money less valuable. The more that the Fed engages in this quantitative easing, you know, basically just printing money, you know, we have trillion-dollar platinum coins being proposed to be minted, you know, that devalues the money in everybody's pockets. And that is basically government stealing from people. And so I did think about this from the context of crime and punishment, you know, my subject, and it government stealing from people is just such a common theme of government. I see it in the criminal justice system constantly, where there are a million different ways for money to be extracted from people. And so when we're looking at the justice system, and I think a lot of us are right now with all this talk about the secret police in Portland and, you know, are they actually seizing people and hauling them off for no reason? Or are these people perhaps confidential informants or someone else who has a government affiliation and they're being extracted? We don't really know at this point. But so as we think about the criminal justice system, I would encourage people to think about the economic impact that it has. You know, one of the reasons why we continue to have a justice system that really doesn't make anybody happy anymore. You know, everybody is acknowledging that we have problems with the justice system and the way that it is being run. And, you know, we think about it from the moral perspective or the public safety perspective. But I would encourage folks to think about it from the economic perspective too, and the burdens that we are placing on productive human beings. You know, we are taking primarily young men out of the employment market during, you know, prime times of their lives. And you know what? It's true. Some of them do deserve it, but they don't deserve the long sentences that we're giving them. And society doesn't deserve the cost of having all these young men put back out on the streets, having spent their most formative and important years behind bars learning from criminals. So we have a system that is just draining economic wealth from poor and vulnerable sectors of society. And that's one of the costs that I think doesn't get acknowledged very much. And so what I would encourage people to think about, you know, I would encourage people to think about the fact that these are families that are hurting. When a member of the family is incarcerated, they don't even get their own underwear and soap and toothpaste provided by the jail. People have to put money on their books for that. People have to put money on their books to take care of child support obligations and the fees that, you know, come along with that. And again, we're not talking about saying, you know, men shouldn't have to be responsible for their children, or women, because there's a lot of child support coming from women as well. What we're saying is that the way the government is administrating the system is not actually solving the purposes for which it was intended. And so that's where I think it links exactly into what Josie was saying about socialism. When the government gets involved, it becomes less efficient. And the goals that we are trying to achieve, public safety, child support, keeping things safe, they just don't happen because the government is sucking up all of the resources. You see that when in quantitative easing, you see it in the justice system, you see it everywhere. And so I think the theme is government is, like the Declaration of Independence said, you know, eating out our substance. That, you know, that it said that King George had sent forth officers to eat out our substance and harass us. And so that's what we see in so many different elements. And so that was my contribution on crime and punishment tonight.
Catherine, holy crap. Okay. So you hit like 92 points. I took 88 notes, and this is the perfect feeder going to Mr. Derek Grayson. But Catherine, I want to come back to you, and I want to list a couple things. So prior to you coming on air, we were talking about debtors' prisons. We were talking about the mid-19th century and the European culture of a debtors' prison and how that operated. And what you just described in the American penal system with our young men and women that are incarcerated, being trained by career criminals, people that are in there long-term, that are shifting the mindset and the abilities and capabilities of those that are young. And then those people are fed back to the street. We continue this process. Now, Hank Sullivan brings up a great point in our discussion thread tonight, where he talks about the privatization of the ability to print and own money. And so, Hank, I'm going to come back to you and let you explain that outside of the chat here shortly. We're going to go to Derek first. But, you know, one of the references that I brought up was Loeffler and Collins. Tonight, folks, listen, all of our viewers, I want you to pay attention very carefully. If you have not paid attention at all to Derek Grayson, that is perfectly fine. You have not offended anybody on this panel, and you have not offended him, because you're paying attention onto what the governor of the state of Georgia has done. He appointed somebody, and it makes you think politically that he appointed somebody of character, caliber, somebody that is proven, somebody that has a reputation to represent you in the United States Senate. Let me feed you some actual factual data from our WNBA coaching staff and owner here for the state of Georgia. Her husband's name is Jeffrey Sprecher. Jeffrey Sprecher is currently the chairman and owner of the New York Stock Exchange. Let me say that again. He is the chairman and owner of the New York Stock Exchange. He is also the CEO of the Intercontinental Exchange. What does intercontinental mean? That means the entire continent. Inside the entire continent. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand there's a conflict of interest that barred her from being appointed and or elected to a position of governmental, administrative, and legislative office because her husband is so deeply buried in the economics of our society. Tonight, we're talking about the Federal Reserve. We're talking about the IRS. Why is somebody with such economic power married to somebody that now holds a coveted and very important senatorial seat? Derek, I'm coming to you. Next 15 minutes, Derek. I want you to defend your seat. Why she shouldn't be there, why Doug Collins himself should not be there and is proven so, and why you're the best option the American people have in the state of Georgia to be represented equally, impartially. You know, you say it better than I can.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. In simple terms, the reason why Georgians should consider me, and the reason why the citizens of the other 49 states should consider me, is because I hold a fidelity to the Constitution, just like I do my Bible, the Word of Christ. And when I go, I recognize that if I'm preaching a sermon, it's not me that I'm preaching the good news of Jesus Christ. In Washington, D.C., I am not going to serve myself, personally enrich myself. I am going to serve the constituency of Georgia because the power belongs to them. They are entrusting that power to me to do two things: to obey the Constitution and to make sure that their interests are not deprived from them. And some will say, well, what if they want X, Y, or Z? Well, you know what? In protecting their rights, that is all a part of ensuring that they get A, B, and C, which is everything that the Constitution has promised to them and nothing more. So that's why I am the best choice. And I'll go ahead and throw this in. I've been advised not to, but Doug Collins and Kelly Loeffler, they are rhinos, Republicans in name only. They are not true conservatives. They represent themselves or their handlers, and look at how they vote. Look at the things they do. Ask them directed questions. You'll get, an answer that is less than satisfactory. So let me go ahead and explain slavery. And the reason I want to explain slavery is because we now exist under several forms of new slavery. I have often said that when slavery ended in 1913, they simply decided to make everybody a slave. And just to give you a little history, you talked about debtor's prison. Well, that ended just after the first third of the 19th century. I think it was 1830 something. And of course, slavery ended in 1865. Both abolished. They were forms of slavery. Okay, you borrow some money, you meet with unforeseen circumstances, they throw you in prison because you owe money. You become their slave. And of course, we all understand the history of American slavery of the Negro in this country. But in 1910, something significant happened. The banks failed. And organized by J.P. Morgan, he got some bankers together, and I'm just going to go briefly into this. Got some bankers together. They decided which banks they were going to allow to fail, which ones they would allow to continue. And they came up with a scheme where they said Never again will we put ourselves at risk. We shall transfer that risk to the American people via the government of the United States. And they did that by way of the IRS, the 16th Amendment, which is Federal Reserve Act. I'm sorry, the 16th Amendment and the Federal Reserve Act. Those three things allow them to relieve themselves of the risk, much like the Vaccine Act of 86, where Big Pharma can now force school children to have to take vaccines. Of course, there are some districts that allow exemptions for religious matters, but Alabama just tried to make it mandatory with no exemptions. And if you didn't comply, you could lose your government benefits. But I talked about that in another video. But moving right along, so this new slavery began in 1913. We became tax and debt slaves. We became tax tools or tax items because of the internal revenue, and we became debt slaves because of every single dollar borrowed into existence from the Federal Reserve. But there are other forms of slavery by which the one percenters, some like to call them that, the upper echelon, I call them the royals. There are other ways by which they enslave politicians, okay, to ensure that they are able to operate unfettered. And not long ago, when I listened to Donald Trump's first speech in his debate, I knew that a civil war was coming because he was going in and was going to start overturning the money changers table. Well, we have a history of people that have done just that, and they would not sell their souls. Abe Lincoln could not be controlled. He was killed. John F. Kennedy could not be controlled. He was killed. Malcolm X was a threat to the Nation of Islam and to the federal government because he was making them look bad in other countries over the issues of Jim Crow and slavery. He was killed. Then we move on to Martin Luther King. He overturned the money changers table. But what I admire the most about Martin Luther King, they had surveilled him, had tapes of him with a woman, threatened to expose him, but Martin Luther King made a judgment call, a righteous judgment call. Am I going to try and preserve the illusion of my religious facade at that particular time, or am I going to continue to stand strong for all of these people that I have fought for all these years in trying to bring about equality? He refused to back down. He would not sell out. He did not sell his soul. He could not be controlled, and they killed him because he overturned the money changers table. Likewise, what we see today, politicians are controlled by one of two mechanisms: greed or their predilections for deviant behavior or other items. Sleeping with young boys. We all hear what's going on with Pedogate, Pizzagate, et cetera, et cetera. We've all heard about that. We all know how politicians are funded by various groups to ensure that certain laws are passed. They are slaves to their masters, and they are not serving the interests of the people. And either they have been entrapped into that position, or they went into it willingly for greed. I don't think Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton have any qualms whatsoever about engaging in corrupt practices. So I don't think anybody had to blackmail them into doing anything because they went into the White House with corruption. So all of that comes back to this, Danny. When you have politicians that will yield to the establishment, you do not have a servant of the people. I was offered by the GOP chairman here in Georgia in 2014, called me up, asked me to come to a meeting. I had done several debates where I won. They did one where they did an online poll, and I was the winner of that debate. After that second debate, I was called to his office. The man offered me $20,000 to drop out of the race. Okay. I did not sell my soul. I told him, you can keep your money. I would rather lose the bigger race. At least I know I would have done what God called me to do. And I stood by that. And so here I am again, and I will continue to stand on the truth, no matter the cost to myself. And there is nothing in my closet. I've never been caught with a live boy, and I certainly have never been caught with a dead woman. So I don't have those predilections that I have to worry about. And whatever it is in my past, I've already talked about it, because I speak boldly about my past and how Jesus Christ turned my life around. So when I say I will die for what I believe in, I will die serving this country, I would gladly give my life, just as Martin Luther King did, for this country, for my constituents, to fight against the corruption in Washington, D.C. That is why you don't see me on Fox News. That is why you don't see me in the press. That is why they don't mention my name, because when I say these things, I change people's hearts. When I tell them to go and look up Doug Collins' voting record and see for yourself, I change people's hearts. When I tell them I am not going to lie to you for your vote, I am going to tell you the truth, because I want you to know what you're getting up front. I ain't promising you nothing extra. The only thing you will get is my fidelity to the Constitution and my pledge to ensure that I will not stand idly by and watch those in Washington, D.C. deprive you of your rights, your liberties, and your freedoms without a fight, and certainly without having told you about it. We found out about the spying on us via the Patriot Act from Edward Snowden. Not a single representative in Washington, D.C. told us. That's how we learned about it. Many don't agree with it. Many of them call him a traitor. But I am thankful, because I at least have the information. I at least know that beyond a shadow of a doubt, our government is capable of many things. And I have said this before, and I'll close. If our government, politicians, could stand by and allow the American slavery to continue for as long as it did, they can certainly engage in nefarious activities today if they are caught up in greed and other deviant predilections. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much, sir, for that opportunity to speak.
Folks, y'all heard it here first. I mean, come on now. Derek Grayson just laid it out. Y'all hear me? He laid it out. He dropped the mic on that one, folks. Pay attention to what is right in front of you. I will share with you this. Based on what we're experiencing today, slavery was not abolished. It was simply distributed differently. And it was distributed against all of us. It has nothing to do with race, pigmentation, or economics. Ultimately, it has to do with status. This is the English right. This is the way it works. It's the way it worked in the 1800s, 1700s, and 1600s. And they're trying to bring it back because of losing power, because of people just like Josie, people just like Derek, truth speakers that will not take your $20,000 to sit down and shut up. Hank, I got to come back to you, brother. Right now, at this point in the topic, we need the wisdom, the education, and the delivery of Mr. Sullivan. We need you to bring to us your breakout of everything that, Josie and Derek have shared with us tonight. They're very passionate politicians, Hank. They're very focused in their ambition, and they hold true to what they believe, what they know, what they've experienced. But Hank, how do we break this out to people to where they can understand it?
Well, first of all, I'll say this, both Derek and Josie, if they earn someone's vote, anyone who votes for them can know that they're speaking the truth to them. And that's the main thing that we need from people, is to simply just tell us the truth of what they see, and using their own eyes rather than using some kind of political way of understanding things and trying to present them. But both of them are going to tell you the unvarnished truth as they see it, and you can count on that. I wrote down a couple of notes when Josie was talking about Venezuela, because I want people to understand that you can't view Venezuela or Cuba or Germany or China or the United States differently, because it's the same system that has put Venezuela where it is, that has put China where it is, that has put Germany where it is, and where it is trying to take America to in its effort to overthrow the American government and the American way of life. It is the same institutions. These are global institutions. Don't think that George Soros is just a guy. George Soros is a conduit for this system. And George Soros is trying to undermine the American way of life and superimpose a new way of life over the top of it and extinguish what it means to be an American. It's the same people. And where we're going, if we don't stop them, is exactly where Venezuela is right now. The globalist power structure that it gains and maintains its power by the ability to create its own money and use it for its own purposes, to take us back to the Federal Reserve. This is why I began this any kind of public persona that I have taken on, because I could see people. It took me a long time. It took me just as long as it takes anyone to understand it. So I understand when people do not understand that money is debt. I understood that people were telling me that online, money is debt, but I never really understood it until finally one day something just kicked in and I grasped what they were trying to say. So I've been trying to say it better so that people can understand what it really means. But all of the decay, all of this transformation of America from what it was or what it could be to where it is right now, with decadence and decays in the city and our infrastructure having decayed and our businesses going overseas, it's all been paid for. Why is it that the liberals always have plenty of money, folks? Why is it they always have all the money that they need to run their campaigns, and Josie and Derek, they're scrounging, and really Republicans in general are scrounging for funds? It's because the globalists, own the ability they own the financial structure of the world. George Soros is part of that. He's simply set up as a conduit for them to put money into it. He's the name behind the money, and he's the one that ends up being the pathway for the funds to reach where they are. That's where Black Lives Matter got its money. That's where Antifa gets its money. That's where so many of these foundations, these tax-free foundations, they were able to take money and create enough influence in the government to create these 501c3s, these tax-free entities that then take the money and they buy influence in the heart of the American government. So the government in and of itself is not bad. Now I would probably disagree with anyone who says that government itself is bad. If government was bad, I don't think the founding fathers would have given us a government. But government that is bought and paid for by private interests who have the ability to create their own money and buy more and more and more influence in that government for their own purposes. That is what is evil. That is the problem. And this is why it's always been the Federal Reserve, which has been my go-to issue. Just like Derek said, if we do not halt this system, if we do not take this system back over and give it back to the people to administer for their own purposes rather than the private purposes, I don't care what issues you got out there. I don't care what your pet issue is, whether it's healthcare or whether it's the size of government or whatever. It can't be fixed. It cannot be fixed as long as they have the power to create their own money for their own purposes. And that is the problem that we're dealing with today. And that's why this became my issue above any other, that I was going to go out and try to learn and try to create understanding in the minds of people who would hear me, because it doesn't matter.
So Hank, how is it that these people cannot be indicted on their criminal activity? Like, how is it, if we can connect the dots, because I'm just some dumb body.
They buy influence in the courts. They buy, when you have an unlimited supply of money, you can do anything you want to, as long as there are people on the other end who are willing to take it. And once they've taken it, then they own you. It's just like any other thing, that any other form of blackmail, that once you've taken the money or taken the favor, or once you have stepped over that line, if you're a judge or if you're a politician, once you've stepped over the line, then you have fear in your heart because they own you and they can control you. And that's what they do.
So Hank, what I understand you to be saying is, Derek previously mentioned that a member and or a political strategic leader in the state of Georgia's GOP offered him $20,000 for him to go away. So what you're saying is, had Derek taken that money, he could have done anything he wanted to in politics in the state of Georgia just by going back to that guy saying, you owe me because I bought out, I sold out, I took the money. It would have given him power in the good old boy system, but it would have compromised him with the people.
Yeah, I think that's a better question for Derek, because I don't know the particulars of what the situation was, or what, I wasn't there. So I don't know.
Derek, let's play.
That's a better question for Derek.
Let's draw a parallel. Hank says that the reason these people don't wind up incarcerated, the reason we don't see Soros on the front of the media blitz being drugged through the streets like Epstein or anybody else, even though he is the founder and funder of the corruption that we see worldwide right now, strategically, in all of the poor, impoverished nations and across West Coast, East Coast, Centralized Coast, all of the metros in the United States, this fancy stuff Soros is doing. We're watching this game be played. He can't be incarcerated because, well, he took the money. So, Derek, if you took the money, would that have given you the same power as Soros?
So, as Hank was speaking, I made a couple of mental notes when you were asking your question. One, Negro slavery used to be legal under the law, even though it was contrary to the preamble in the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Yet we had the 3/5 clause in the Constitution saying that, I'm only 3/5 or whatever the calculation was that they used in counting, for their representation. So it was legal under the law. Was the law moral? No, but it was legal. So nobody was going to jail for it. It had to be abolished. Slavery had to be abolished first. Hank is bringing up the money in politics. It's legal. It is not illegal for Soros types or anybody else to contribute money to causes to get the things that they want. When I first learned that the IRS code was so complicated and convoluted, that it was intentional, it blew my mind, and I asked why. So that nobody can understand it, number one, and so that ways by which the handlers who lobby for those laws can skirt the law. And that was, an eye opener for me. I was approached first to pick something, and the exact words were further down the trough. This was by a local GOP chairman. Pick something further down the trough. Your turn will come. Others have paid their dues. It's their turn now. This is what they said to me. And I literally said, look, you ain't got to help me. Not at all. No problem. Just stay the hell out of my way. So, and that's a conversation that I recorded. I had no idea. That's why, again, they called me there to sit and talk with them. And the $20,000 that I was offered and additional money on top of that was so that I could win some other seat. Okay. So yeah, when you take that kind of help, people expect something from you. And I could give the names of the people, but I will not in this forum. I'm saving that trump card for another time when it'll be more useful to me. But in my video yesterday, my drive time, I talked about Josie Cruz, the only Republican running against Hank Johnson. Do you think that the GOP offered to buy her signs, to get somebody to do phone banking for her? That's a seat they ought to be trying to pick up. But she's not getting any help from the GOP, and she is running as a Republican. Instead, and I'm jealous about this, she is being attacked based on association claims. So that's basically the charge, guilty by association with some other people. And that's what she's getting. And they haven't mentioned my name yet. What my name? Say my name. Okay. But and I'm associated with some of those same people. So, these are the times that we are living in. And Hank is so right. Government is not bad because we wouldn't have given it to us. And it just as Hank had to explain that, unless we take it back from those people, they will misuse us with it. And it's just like when Paul talked about government, I have to tell Christians, just because Paul said, obey those leaders because God put them in charge, Paul is not talking about corrupt leadership. God would never back a corrupt politician that's going to abuse and misuse the people. God puts in place those that will obey his will. Those are the ones.
He raises one up, he tables the other.
That's it. So, I get it. Josie gets it. You get it. My team, they get it.
Yeah.
And I want to give a blanket thanks, and I'll shut up, to all of those that donated. I wish you would reach out to Josie and do the same thing, but I made one video and we had 20 to 25 people to go and donate because they were moved by the truth, which is what Hank just said, being a truth teller. The truth causes people to do something different. It's just who is bold enough to tell them the truth, even when it's unpopular. There is not a single popular prophet from the Bible. None of them were prophet. John the Baptist even lost his head.
Yes.
And he was the forerunner for the man. So, telling the truth is an easy thing for me, but that does not mean that it does not bring its own set of challenges. And as Hank said, one of them, Josie and I, we scrounged to get the word out because we believe in this. Josie has seen what socialism does. I have seen how liberal Democrat policies have destroyed so many Black families. That's why I got involved actively in the first place. And when I realized, you know, the out of wedlock children, and I know I'm going on and on, but suffice it to say, I do this because I have seen the struggle and I have lived the struggle. And I want something different for my children. I want my children to be able to have children and be able to raise them in the America that I knew growing up, the America where you could go and do whatever you set your mind and your heart to do. In spite of Jim Crow, my father still obtained his master's degree in science and retired as a teacher. My mother, despite growing up picking cotton, still earned her bachelor's degree and retired from government service after having been a teacher for a time. So I know it is possible in that America, despite Jim Crow even having existed at that particular time. But when I grew up, when Hank grew up, it's a different time than what we're in right now. I'm sorry I spoke so long.
Derek, I wasn't gonna stop you. Derek brought up some things that I need you guys to understand tonight. Some things that you guys aren't aware of. As my viewers, you need to know. As he spoke, I was reminded of a song called My Alabaster Box. I need you to understand that in the state of Georgia, I myself, as a former candidate for the United States Congress, that was buried in a false number, that was hidden and drugged behind the cart and left in the shambles because I wouldn't do it the way that the good old boy system did it. I'm begging you to listen to my sister, Josie Cruz. I'm begging you to listen to my brother, Derek Grayson. I'm begging you to have their backs because I don't want them to experience what I have recently experienced. Ladies and gentlemen, you have no idea what it's like to be a member of those cut from the cloth in which people believe in you, but the system slams a door on you and ousts you because you are defended by the Almighty. You come with the authority of the kingdom above all kingdoms. Folks, I'm not trying to preach to you, but I'm trying to tell you that what you're dealing with is real. And if you will grab a hold for just 1 minute, if you'll take arms with each other, arm in arm, link arms, hug each other and move forward. There are people here that are willing to represent you before this gets bad. My concern, my fear, and my worry, my darkest day is that none of us will make it before it's too late, and that you'll call on us when the time has already come. We have volunteered our time, our efforts, our money, our hearts, our minds, our experience, our knowledge, our pain, our suffering, our hope, our vision, our tears to link with you. If you think for a moment that this is a joke or some charismatic commercial, you have mistaken truth and reality for a false perception that was sold to you. Derek just poured out impromptu and an extraction, everything that Derek just shared with you. There's the fact that we are living in a day and in a time where if your faith is not centered, if your people are not centered, if your relationship with God is not centered, if you don't know what it takes to stand at the table we are begging to be at to defend you, then we ask you to trust us. Just get behind us. It doesn't even take your money. Just stand out there with a shirt, stand out there with a sign, tell a friend, bring your relatives, bring anybody and everybody, get to the polls, hold people accountable. The GOP, we are Republicans. The people in which we state we are aligned with their conservative values are trying to buy us out and silence our voice as though Lincoln never existed. Do you not understand that they are trying to purchase us into a place of slavery that is now economic, that is now political, where they sell us into bondage. I am not for sale. Derek is not for sale. Josie is not for sale. We were purchased by the blood of Jesus Christ. We will take no offer but that of the blood from the crown of the King. People, wake up. Yes, we are faith believers. Yes, we are conservatives. Yes, we are Christians. Yes, we believe. We are GOP. We are Republicans. We are the feet on the ground that will argue policy to defend generations to come. Derek Grayson, coming from the land and the history of slavery. Josie Cruz, coming from the land of South America, socialism, communism, and immigration, now here legally abiding to represent you. Scars and whips over the legacy of their bloodlines. Everything that they have ever been, everything they have wanted to be, everything they have ever believed in, at the stake for their own crucifixion in your name. They have nothing to win. They have nothing to gain. They have everything to lose. And they are made a mockery of those that claim that we have bowed to their order. We paid $5,220 to use their name. We paid that money out of our own pockets to use their name. I know I'm coming off rather angry. Listen to me, people. If not now, when will you wake up and realize that if they can't talk to you like we are, then they are not politicians, and they were already bought by the other side, the side opposed to King Jesus. Derek, you have 1 minute to tell them how to find you, to reach you, communicate with you.
Thank you very much, Danny. I want to first thank you for that rousing sermon there. I thought I was in church. Therefore, then I went to looking for my Bible. Okay, so that was very, very, very moving. My friend Hank, thank you for being on the show, Catherine, and Josie for being a guest, and particularly my team. I've got some people that volunteer, Scott, Lisa, Geraldine, John, and Jim, DJ Dale, whom I've known for 20 years or more, who used to be a staunch liberal Democrat. And we managed to convert her. You know, that's what happened. You hang around long enough, boy, you know, you just keep throwing it at the wall, and sooner or later something's gonna stick. And you know, I thank God for all of them, and they're standing in this and trying to put it out there. And again, thanks to all of those that have supported me over the years on YouTube and Facebook. You can find me at GraysonForGeorgia.com, FORGA.com. Please visit the website, sign up for our weekly newsletter, and donate. If you are moved by anything that I may say, just buy me a cup of coffee once a week, and you know, we'll keep it moving from there. Thank you very much, Danny.
Derek Grayson, all of our other panelists, I thank you, and I appreciate you every week, as I always do. Josie, how do they find you? How do they get in touch with you?
I just wanna let you know, there's only 3 reasons why I'm running as your candidate for district number 4 here in Georgia. One is because I want to give back to the country who gave me so much. He gave me freedom. He gave me my family. He gave me my kids, my husband, my ex-husband. I'm happily divorced 2 times. Even the bad, the good, and the ugly experiences. This country is amazing. So this is time for me to give back to the country who gave me so much. And I'm going to take this opportunity to call for unity. We need to unite. We have a country that we need to save. Our country is under attack. They are trying to destroy the Constitution. They're trying to destroy our republic. And it's our responsibility as citizens, as citizen of the United States of America to recover our country back. I'm not talking here about politics. I'm not talking here about political parties. I'm calling on to the citizens. You enjoy your freedom if you enjoy moving up and down and not having the government telling you what to eat and not what not to wear and where to go and where not to go. Please, we need to unite and rescue our country back from this system that this elite want to implement on America, which they already implemented in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Mexico, and so on and so on. And the last part, what I'm running is, I really, as a child of God, as a daughter of a pastor, as a daughter of a missionary, as a daughter of the mighty God, our Lord, I really want to bring healing to our district. It's time for America to heal. And the only way that we can do this healing is not only a spiritual healing, we need to have mentally and psychological healing. And this healing is through looking for God, looking for guidance, looking for and following forgiveness, and look forward for what the Lord is giving us as an individual, but also as a nation. So this is one of the main 3 things what I'm running. You can look for me on JosieCruz2020.com, JOHSIECRUZ 2020.com. And if you want to know anything about me, just look on the blog. And if you want a good gossiping, just look at one of the blogs that say the making of the legislator. You're going to know why I'm here, how I came, how I do end up in Georgia, and what happened with my life before. So the Lord turned it around and changed it. And today I can say I am a victorious person in the name of Jesus. Thank you.
Danny.
Folks, tonight we traveled an interesting road. Started with the Federal Reserve and the IRS, toxicity of money, the root of all evil. It's not a whole lot that I have to wrap up on. Hank, go ahead, man. I mean, we're still on. Let's do it.
Just to bring it home, back to the Federal Reserve, I just want to say one thing. Just contemplate this, and you'll contemplate the problem that we have in our country. The private issuance of currency is fundamental to the growth and the policy making of government. If you want to change the growth and the policy making of government, you've got to change the issuance of the currency. That's it, bottom line.
Hank, thank you for that, because I'm a shipwreck. And to our viewers tonight, listen, for those of you that understand what systemic, real racism and systemic prejudice is, welcome to the table. That's why we're running. We're all experiencing it. Whether we're white, black, Hispanic, imports, or native, we're all experiencing it. Simply because we're not the race that's welcome with the elites. You heard it here. You heard it first. Because we don't have the money. Because we don't do it their way. We're broken people trying to represent broken people in a broken system to get broken results. I'm asking you to be broken with me. And if you'll join me tonight, fall on your broken knees before Almighty God, the one thing that we know is perfect. From everybody here at the Grayson Network, my panelists, and myself and my family, your host, Danny Ellison, thank you. And we bid you a good night.